If you are hearing this, you are a strong woman. Everyone is looking for you, Mommy, everywhere. We will not rest. Your children will not rest until we are together.
The video. An 84-year-old woman is missing from her own home. Nancy Guthrie was last seen during what should have been an ordinary day inside the space she knew best, her own residence. There were no immediate signs of disruption visible to the outside world, no public warnings, no indication that anything was wrong. But today, the Nancy Guthrie disappearance is being treated as more than a routine missing person case. Investigators believe Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home against her will. Personal belongings remained inside. The items she relied on daily were untouched. There was no evidence suggesting she prepared to leave. That determination changes the nature of this investigation. This is no longer about an elderly woman who may have wandered. It is about a critical window of time, a span of hours in which something happened inside her home. Now, a key development has sharpened that window. What her daughter revealed publicly may change the Nancy Guthrie timeline. A clarification about when contact was last made and when something first appeared wrong has narrowed the focus for investigators. Please make sure you comment while listening to this update. Give us your feedback and we'll make sure we respond to everything. That's a proof that we are fighting for justice and what is right. Before this became a headline, before the phrase 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie missing began circulating beyond her neighborhood, she was simply Nancy, a mother, a grandmother, a woman whose world had gradually narrowed with age. At 84 years old, Nancy Guthrie lived a life defined by familiarity. Her days followed patterns that rarely changed. Morning routines, scheduled calls, familiar chairs, familiar rooms. For someone at her stage of life, routine was not just preference, it was structure. It was stability. It was safety. Family members describe her as home-centered. She did not travel alone. She did not make sudden plans. She relied on consistency. Like many elderly individuals, Nancy had limited mobility. Moving long distances without assistance would have been difficult. Managing transportation independently would have been unlikely. Even short trips required planning. That context matters. When reports first surfaced that 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie was missing, investigators immediately examined the possibility of voluntary departure. Did she leave on her own? Did she wander? Was there confusion? Very quickly, those questions began to fall away. Personal necessities were left behind. Items she depended on daily remained untouched. There was no packed bag, no sign of preparation, no evidence that she had arranged transportation. For someone with limited mobility and a deeply routine-oriented life, those details are decisive. Authorities have indicated that the scene did not suggest someone preparing to leave. Instead, investigators believe Nancy Guthrie could not have left on her own. That distinction is critical. When officials determine that an elderly woman could not have left voluntarily, the investigation shifts immediately. The phrase, taken from her home, enters the conversation. And that is exactly what investigators now believe, that Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home against her will. The last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie is, by every available account, painfully ordinary. There was no argument, no raised voices, no visible distress. She was seen during a moment that fit seamlessly into her normal routine, inside the environment she knew, following patterns that had not changed in years. The person who last saw her did not register alarm at the time. Nothing about the interaction suggested urgency. Nothing appeared out of place. It was the kind of brief, forgettable moment that only becomes significant in hindsight. A normal encounter that should have led into another quiet evening at home. And then, the expected follow-up never came. At first, the silence did not immediately signal danger. Calls went unanswered. Messages were not returned. In many families, that delay might have been brushed off. A nap, a phone left in another room, a routine disruption. But with Nancy, silence was unusual. Her habits were consistent. Missed contact was not normal. As minutes passed, concern began to replace assumption. Family members retraced the timeline in real time. When she was last seen, when she was expected to check in, when she would normally respond. Each unanswered attempt tightened the knot of worry. Concern escalated into alarm when it became clear that time was moving forward without explanation. Nancy did not appear where she was expected. She did not answer when she always did. The ordinary pattern broke. And when routine breaks for someone so dependent on it, the absence itself becomes for days. The investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie moved forward based on an initial timeline. The last confirmed sighting, the first missed call, the moment concern escalated into a report. Then her daughter spoke publicly. What her daughter revealed changes the timeline. The correction was not dramatic. It was not an accusation. It was a clarification. A small but critical adjustment about time. She explained that her last confirmed contact with Nancy did not occur when first believed. A phone call that had been remembered as happening later in the evening had actually taken place earlier, a detail that seemed minor at first. The exact hour, the exact sequence, shifted the investigative window by more than anyone realized. That shift created a gap. Originally, our investigators were working within a broader span of hours, a window large enough to include multiple possibilities, multiple movements, multiple interactions. But when the daughter revisited her call logs and reconstructed the sequence of events more precisely, the timeline narrowed. The period in which Nancy Guthrie could have been taken from her home became shorter, more defined, less forgiving. There was another detail. The daughter noted that a door Nancy typically kept secured was found unlocked. At first, that fact blended into the confusion of discovery. In moments of crisis, small inconsistencies can feel insignificant, but placed inside a revised timeline, that unlocked door became something else, a marker, a possible point of entry, a detail that no longer sat quietly in the background. And then there was the silence. The daughter clarified the exact moment she first sensed something was wrong, not simply when calls went unanswered, but when Nancy failed to follow a routine check-in that had never been missed before. That specific, predictable contact point had always anchored the evening. When it did not happen, it marked the beginning of the suspicious window of time. What her daughter revealed changes the Nancy Guthrie timeline in 3 critical ways. First, it tightens the gap between the last confirmed sighting and the first missed contact. That gap is now smaller, which means investigators can focus on a shorter span. Fewer vehicles, fewer movements, fewer potential witnesses. Second, it reframes what once seemed ordinary. An unlocked door, a brief neighbor sighting, when a passing vehicle, details that might have blended into a 6-hour window become far more significant inside a 2-hour window. Third, it increases accountability. When the timeline narrows, alibis are tested more precisely. Surveillance footage can be reviewed within a defined range. Phone activity can be mapped against specific minutes instead of broad estimates. This is why the phrase matters. What her daughter revealed changes the timeline. It does not solve the Nancy Guthrie disappearance, but it sharpens it. It removes ambiguity. It transforms a vague absence into a defined interruption. As the Nancy Guthrie timeline narrowed, her daughter made a public request that carried weight far beyond its simplicity. She asked for proof of life. The phrase is clinical, it is deliberate, and families do not use it casually. And in missing person cases, especially those involving elderly victims, a request for proof of life signals a shift. It tells investigators and the public that the family no longer believes the situation can be explained by confusion, delay, or routine disruption. It acknowledges the possibility that someone else has control over information, and possibly over the missing person themselves. In the Nancy Guthrie disappearance, the family plea for proof of life was not dramatic. It was measured. There were no accusations attached, no speculation, just a request. Confirm that she is alive. Provide evidence that she is safe. Families use the phrase proof of life for a reason. It establishes a baseline, a photograph, a short recorded message, a verifiable current confirmation. It does not ask for negotiation, it asks for certainty. For an 84-year-old woman, time is not neutral. Time carries medical implications. It carries physical implications, limited mobility, possible health conditions, daily medication. These are not abstract concerns. They are practical realities. That is why silence becomes significant. When hours pass without contact, silence feels unsettling. When days pass, silence becomes directional. It begins to suggest control, not confusion. The absence of proof of life in the Nancy Guthrie disappearance intensifies the urgency because each passing hour reduces the margin for error. The daughter's family plea did not attempt to dramatize the situation. It reflected endurance. It reflected the understanding that the only way to shift the balance of uncertainty is to ask directly for confirmation. Or proof of life is the minimum reassurance a family can request. It does not solve the case. It does not assign blame, but it establishes one critical fact: whether the person at the center of the investigation is still alive. With the daughter's clarification narrowing the timeline, investigators turn their focus to the window of hours in which Nancy Guthrie could have been taken from her home. Authorities have shared limited details publicly, but they emphasize that the case is being treated with methodical care and precision. Investigators believe that this was not a voluntary departure. Personal items remained in place. There were no signs that Nancy prepared to leave. That, combined with her age and limited mobility, reinforces the conclusion that someone else intervened. At this stage, our investigators are considering several possibilities, always framed as lines of inquiry, not accusations. They are examining whether there was forced entry, whether someone familiar with her routine might have had access, and whether a person exploited her vulnerability to remove her from the home. The presence or absence of forced entry remains part of the investigation. Even if no obvious signs exist, investigators know that subtle means can be used to gain access. A key left in a known location, an unlocked door, or a brief window of unsupervised entry can be enough for someone determined. Familiarity with the victim's routine is another critical consideration. An individual who understood Nancy's habits, when she answered calls, when she moved through her home, and who visited regularly, could exploit that knowledge to act without immediate detection. Investigators are also attentive to the victim's vulnerability. Age, limited mobility, and reliance on daily routines make it easier for someone with knowledge to intervene without leaving obvious traces. Every detail of her daily life is being analyzed to determine how someone could have taken advantage of it. At this stage, authorities have not confirmed a suspect or motive. The investigation is focused on understanding the movements, actions, and opportunities during the narrowed timeline. Each scenario is being assessed carefully, and each detail, no matter how small, could be decisive in solving the case. Investigators analyzing the Nancy Guthrie disappearance are looking not just at the scene, but at patterns, the subtle behaviors that may indicate who could have had the opportunity to intervene. While no suspect has been publicly identified, authorities consider certain traits that could be present in someone involved. One factor is familiarity. The person responsible may have known Nancy's routines, her home, or both. Understanding when doors were unlocked, when she would be alone, or which areas of the house she relied on most could allow someone to act without drawing attention. That knowledge is not unusual in cases involving elderly victims. It does not point to any individual, but it does guide investigators in reviewing access and opportunity. Another factor is control. Investigators recognize that the timing and manner of the disappearance suggest a deliberate intervention rather than a random or chaotic act. So the decision to remove someone from their home, particularly an elderly woman who depended on routine, implies planning. Authorities are focused on reconstructing that planning through evidence and witness accounts. Investigators also note the importance of timing and silence. Whoever was involved knew the significance of each hour that passed. The longer the absence remained unexplained, the greater the psychological and practical impact on the family, and the more opportunity to obscure traces of entry or movement. Finally, investigators examine risk and exposure. Any individual involved had to balance the act of removing Nancy with minimizing detection. That includes physical precautions, awareness of neighbors or cameras, and understanding that public attention could grow quickly if her absence became widely known. By analyzing these patterns, investigators build a behavioral profile without assigning blame. Each element, familiarity, control, timing, and awareness of exposure, provides context for how the disappearance may have occurred and helps focus the ongoing inquiry. For the family and the public, this framework does not identify a perpetrator. It clarifies the investigative approach and underscores why every detail, every observation, and every corrected timeline matters in reconstructing what happened to Nancy Guthrie. Somewhere, someone knows where Nancy Guthrie is. That knowledge carries weight, not just factual, but moral. Silence is a choice. Every unanswered call, every moment without proof of life is a decision that shapes the family's experience, prolongs uncertainty, and deepens worry. At 84 years old, time is not neutral. When every hour affects her health, her safety, and the ability of investigators to reconstruct what happened, information that could change everything sits, unshared, in the hands of someone who understands its importance. The absence of communication is more than quiet. It is influence. It directs the emotions of those waiting, dictates the urgency of the search, and frames the investigation itself. Whoever holds that knowledge carries responsibility, and the moral weight of silence is felt most profoundly by those who love Nancy Guthrie.